Hi everyone, I'm Merritt. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. We definitely appreciate Cooley letting us host the event here. So I want to have Greg give a few words about Cooley and welcome you all here.
Thank you, Arte. My name is Greg Clark with the Cooley Law Firm. I want to just welcome you all to our San Francisco office. I'm not going to do a commercial for our firm, but we're a global law firm that works with early stage startup companies and the investors who fund them. And we also have a lot of experience and history in the artificial intelligence space, not only with startups, but working with more AI blue chip companies like OpenAI and NVIDIA, who we've represented since their Series A round. So what a ride that has been. But anyway, this is obviously a really important topic to a lot of people, including all of you. We're happy to host it, and if Cooley can ever be of any help, just some of my colleagues will be here, ask us, we'd be more than happy to help. So, welcome.
Thanks, Greg. Once again, I'm Arte Merritt. We appreciate Cooley hosting us here tonight. I was going to do a quick demo of Reconify, and then we're going to jump into the panel discussion. So this is going to take a few minutes. Hopefully you're all excited. So I'm the founder of Reconify. Reconify is an analytics platform for generative AI. So if you're building generative AI applications, you want to track how the prompts and responses are working and keep track of things like latency, costs, all that kind of stuff, you can do that with Reconify. So I'll just show you a few of the reports real fast, and then we'll get to the exciting part here. So this is just a quick dashboard of all the apps that I'm tracking. I'm going to pick one. This is a chat application. And some of the metrics we track are what you think of as traditional analytics around your users, sessions, all those kind of traditional product analytics. But since we're talking about generative AI, we start to show the interactions, the tokens, the costs and latency, and these become real concerns at the enterprise level. But beyond the metrics, where it gets a little more exciting is to actually look at the prompts and responses themselves. So these are all the prompts going into this particular chat application. I can pick one, like, tell me a cat joke, it's kind of fun. You can see all the responses when folks have typed in, tell me a cat joke. I can also look to see were there any similar prompts and now compare, like, tell me a cat joke versus, tell me a good cat joke, or tell me a funny cat joke, if you like cat jokes. So you can see the comparison here. But if I go back to the prompts, it can be a bit overwhelming to know what's actually happening. Seeing all these. So what we do is prompt clustering. And what this does is it clusters all the prompts together based on the semantic meaning, and it basically is bubbling up the intents or the common themes that are occurring in this generative AI application. So I can see if you're a Celtics fan, there's a bunch of people asking whether Jason Tatum will make the Hall of Fame or not. There's folks asking how long it takes to get to Mars. And then I can go in and explore those and see compare them, so I can see how long does it take to reach Mars versus how long a trip is it to Mars. And we can compare those responses. We can do the same thing from the response side. We can cluster all the responses and then compare the prompts. So these reports are to help you with either prompt engineering or fine-tuning your models. We keep track of all the individual interactions, so if latency is a concern, I can sort by that and see, this one had high latency, why was that? It's a pretty long response. We have all the transcripts back and forth, so you can see the interactions between the Gen AI and the user. And then we keep track of all the individual model usage too, so this one's using quite a few different models. And now you can start to see things like comparing the cost and latency. So AI21's Jurassic tends to be a heck of a lot faster than OpenAI's models, which is kind of interesting. And then you can see the cost difference too. And then in addition to the reports, we have tools to take action. So we have this concept of guardrail alerts, and you can set guardrails on prompts or responses. So perhaps you don't want people asking, tell me a cat joke. That's kind of silly. But if it was, people sending in proprietary information into a model, you don't want that to happen. You can set a guardrail on either the prompt or the response if you don't want the response going back out. And it's based on the semantic similarity, so you can say it's 50% similar to this prompt, or 100% the same, you get an alert to either an email or a webhook. If it goes to the email, it's just letting you know it happened. If you do it to a webhook, then you can actually take action in real time, like prevent that prompt going in or prevent the response from going out. So I can trigger that real quick here. I have this thing that just asks for a cat joke. So hopefully it does it. I pull up my email. So it's already come through 666. So here, so I sent an alert on this particular response. And this response came through that was 78% matched, so it triggered that guardrail alert. I can jump in and see the interaction. I can go and see the transcript. So this is one thing, getting to view the alert. If you got it via the webhook, then you can actually take action. Like don't allow that response going out. Maybe take programmatic action, or a human looks at it. And it's all meant to be pretty easy to integrate. It's NPM and Pit modules, so it ends up being just a couple lines of code. Like if you're using OpenAI, you just include the module, pass OpenAI into it, and you program as you normally do. And we support Amazon Bedrock, Anthropic, Cohere, and through Bedrock, you got a whole bunch more too, like Stable Diffusion and whatnot. So that's just a quick overview. Anyone wants to try it, you can sign up for free at Reconify.com. So that's my pitch. And I'll just get on to the good stuff, the panel. So I want to call up all the panelists, and then we'll get started. Yeah, I'm going to turn it on. So I'm super excited by this panel. We got a chance to work with a few of the folks up here before. So we're really happy to have everyone. What I thought we could do is just do quick intros. You can do your 30-second intro and start with Austin.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Austin. I work at Okta Ventures. So I run the unit that invests in startups that have some sort of connectivity to Okta, which is a security company here in San Francisco. We have 3-4 portfolio companies that are operating, with some variation in tools on LLMs and Gen AI. So I'm happy to talk about those experiences. I've also been in venture for 8 years. So I've managed to see one cycle, at least I would say, and so I've seen different permutations of AI implementations over the years, and happy to talk a little bit more about that. But excited to be here, and hope I can connect with some of you all after the panel.
Hello everyone, Andrea Friio, Principal Partner Solution Architect for AWS. In AWS, my role is to accelerate the adoption of generative AI, so helping the ISV, so our partners building using generative AI. I have to admit that this is probably the third revolution that I'm witnessing. I'm incredibly excited. It's something that there is passion back. The space is becoming exciting again. So thank you for having me. Arte is very stimulating.
Hi everyone, my name is Roger Kibbe. I work as a developer evangelist at Samsung, so that's going out to developers and showing them how to use our products. I started as a developer, I was an enterprise architect, a technology strategist, and in 2017 I said, wow, this Alexa thing is super cool. I'm going to quit my cozy job and start a startup. Well, that was an adventure. Didn't all work out, but I've been in conversational AI ever since, and I just well put that it really rejuvenated the, a couple years ago it was a little bit kind of down times for voice is kind of passe, and then this magical thing came out and we all got super excited. So I'm super excited about generative AI, what's happening.
Hi, I'm Tracy Rubin. I'm a partner in our technology transactions practice at Cooley. That practice normally focuses on helping clients with their day-to-day commercial contracts as well as larger M&A transactions and financings. Since the announcement and release of ChatGPT a little more than a year ago, a significant portion of that practice has been counseling clients on how to develop generative AI tools, counseling clients on how to use third-party AI tools internally, counseling clients on how to use third-party AI tools and integrate them into their customer applications, And, as was just mentioned, it has been a massive topic of massive interest this year. And I think in a lot of ways it's actually rejuvenated, the financing industry as well. I mean, all of the investors are happy to pour money into AI when they weren't really happy to pour money into anything else. So I'm happy to be here on this panel.
Thanks again, everyone. I appreciate everyone being on this too. So we have a handful of questions and all to ask for the panelists, and we'll open up to the audience towards the end. So I just want to get started. There is a lot of excitement with generative AI, and the larger enterprises are, some of them are implementing the models, building tools to help implement the models, but there hasn't been too many applications launched just yet. Like I often hear folks are doing internal tools or experimentation. Is that a fair assessment that we're at that experimentation stage? What are y'all seeing? Maybe start here with Austin.
That's 100% accurate. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, when ChatGPT launched, you started to see various different companies interact in different ways. So, I knew someone who was in the Samsung strategy team, which was doing sort of internal consulting, and immediately he was using the tool, for a variety of different needs, right? So, one of the examples that he was using was trying to understand where they could sell a large TV they put in the backyard. And so he was querying and asking questions, okay, find me every Lowe's department store that's in a warm zip code that could potentially have the implementation of this large TV that we could sell into people's backyards. And loved this tool. It saved him tons and tons of time. And then I think about a month later, Samsung pulled the plug completely and said, we can't use it. I don't know what the status is today, but there's these fits and starts where companies are experimenting and excited about something. They may hit a roadblock and then immediately pull back. But I guarantee you any large enterprise, $1 billion plus in revenue, there is somebody right now working on what is the AI strategy, how can we develop products in this category, what can we do to enhance different products. The reality is that there's no coherent strategy. So there are multiple internal parallel streams happening, in all sorts of different companies, Okta included, and everyone's trying to understand what are the tools that are available, what are the semantics, how do you categorize these different tools, and then what should we focus on? And then the secondary piece to that is, okay, even if we want to try and experiment on some of these things, can we even go out and use them? So I will give one very quick anecdote. So I was looking around about 5-6 months ago to try and find anyone that was using any of these tools internally. And there was a team in our business technology, essentially our IT team, that wanted to classify Okta's Salesforce entries as either B2B or B2C. Is this company have a B2B business model or B2C business model? And is it possible to derive that based on the information that's in the field of Salesforce? It's a relatively simple use case. This person who is in charge of this project could not get a quote from Anthropic or anyone else to actually do this work. Because, of course, these companies that have raised all this money literally don't have sales teams set up to actually service the enterprises that are asking for the use cases. Because they have a long queue of, say, 300 requests from all these different companies. They don't even know what to build. They don't even know what to quote. And so I always use that as an example of just how early stage we are. So we see these amazing tools, but even if you actually talk to those companies and you realize the number of enterprise customers they have is pretty small and they don't even know how to actually issue products. So it's very early days.
Take a different perspective in this sense. So yes, we are seeing already in adoption. In a second, I will explain the use cases. For sure, there's no question that it's time to experiment. But in the new world, actually, there is a thin boundary between experimenting, production, pilot, and POC. In my experience, many of the customers, yes, for internal use mostly, but not necessarily, in a second I'll give you a few examples, are using for internal application. Just to give you some data. The productivity increase for the knowledge workers is estimated by Gartner, meaning increasing 30% using this technology, generative AI. So you can understand the rush to get in production. And there are already solid use cases. The most obvious, and you can see on Amazon.com, probably few of you noted that if you go now on Amazon.com, you can see the summarization of the review. That actually summarization, and I can, if someone is interested, please get in touch with me. We have also phenomenal results of our for the customer service. In customer service, the summarization at scale is a big deal. It provides the ability of saving 30% of the time of the agents. In another use cases that we have in production, one more time, these are public reference. We showed also as a referenceable customer, Reinvent, also healthcare is another use case that we have customer in production. No question, it's experimenting time. But the recommendation for my customer is make sure when you start a project like that, start small and nimble.
Yeah.
Go in production for something that doesn't bring particular risk. Is it risky to go in production with the summarization, things like that? Why not? Start nimble and then expand from there.
So I agree with everything that's been said. Something where I see internally a lot of energy is marketers. I think marketers looked at this tool and started dancing in the streets, right? Because it's just incredible. The cost, especially if you're on the creative side. So I used to work for Gap Inc. and they had something like a team of 40 people who just created emails because they'd segment these 8 different segments and they create separate emails. Well, now they have this tool that drives the cost down incredibly well. Instead of 8 segments, you could have 50, 100. Every person could be their own segment. I think that's actually coming. So I think it's an incredible tool for marketers. And I think whether sanctioned or unsanctioned, they're getting really excited to use it and using it a lot. And then once again, that's behind the firewall. The other thing I see a lot is developers. It's an incredible tool for developers. If your developer isn't using it, I'd say you have to have a conversation with them because it is, yes, it's flawed, it's got problems, but I have a deep development background, and when I saw that, and I don't do as much development nearly as I used to, I was like, this is incredible. One, I can get it to write some code, that's some basic code for me, and then fix it. Or even more exciting to me is like, man, this is just not working, right? And pull your hair out, the dent in my head against pounding against the cement wall is getting pretty bloody. Well, you know what? Send it in one of those. It's like boom, boom, boom. Here's the problem, which is just an incredible time saver. So 2 examples where I've seen a lot of traction there. And frankly, some of that is sanctioned. Some of it is, people are just going and using the tool because it works well for them.
I talked to a popular pizza delivery company. When you mentioned the marketing, the data science team built a tool for their marketers. And it wasn't just to come up with content, but it was to generate ideas. And it kept coming up with the idea to give away free pizza. We need the guardrails to prevent
We adopted it tonight.
yeah. I was going to, Tracy, for the folks that are taking this cautious approach, what do you think might be needed for them to start to move more into production?
Yeah, and so first I'll echo a lot of the use cases that were mentioned. I'll just add very briefly 2 of the other ones that I'm seeing a lot with clients are integrating AI-powered chatbots into existing products. That's been a really popular use case. And then more recently, all of the tools that will sort of sit in on your meetings and record them, transcribe them, provide a summary has also become an increasingly popular use case. Though I'll say a number of those use cases do have legal risks, so please don't take this as an endorsement of those use cases in all scenarios. But in terms of what's needed for adoption, it is that cautious approach, right? And as you had mentioned earlier, sometimes there's a real risk when people think about, well, what data am I entering into these tools and how are these tools going to use the data? And so, for example, the assisted coding use case, again, that's, as was just mentioned, it's, people are seeing it's saving engineers probably 30% of their time, and, especially on tasks that are sort of time-consuming but not complicated, tasks that are redundant, tasks where you just sort of need something but you don't really need sort of a senior level engineer doing it. And so it can be great, but then there are all the risks of, well, what about the risk of inputting our sensitive source code into a third-party tool, and what's going to happen to that code, right? Are they going to use it for further training? Is that potentially going to get in the hands of a competitor? I know I'm probably skipping ahead a little bit, but another concern is that, at least in the US, there's no ownership of anything that's AI generated. And that's really complicated when you're talking about coding, trying to figure out, well, now that I've used this coding assisted tool, how am I even going to know what an engineer wrote, what the tool wrote, where do I draw those lines? And so how do I get comfortable if I were ever to try to obtain a copyright or obtain a patent on some of this code? Right now I almost couldn't, because now that I've used this tool, it effectively taints all the code. And so, building in some of those guardrails and safeguards to get companies comfortable that their sensitive data is going to be protected, right? They're not going to be sued for infringement. They're not going to lose the opportunity to protect information that they want to protect or own data that they want to own. I think those are a lot of the concerns that companies are struggling with.
That's definitely fair. When we were doing demo nights, one of the first events we hosted was a demo night, and one of the, whether I'll let them talk about their startup after, but it was basically you could create children's books and children's stories, and then some folks had asked who owns the content after, especially if it might take in images that are proprietary images. So it does open up a lot of interesting questions. So maybe we should jump over to that. Just what are some of those impacts on security and data security and privacy? Maybe we could start with Andrea this time.
Absolutely. So what you heard is music from my ear, and I would take very, very seriously those concerns.
Yeah.
So I'm also an engineer, and now I write code. Before starting code, I start using our own tool, is Amazon Q, and I started from there to write my scripts, my Java or Python script. However, immediately you realize that you have the question, which kind of code I'm using? Is it an MIT license? Is it copyright maybe? So this is absolutely at the top of your concern. Security, now I will articulate, infringement of IP, and also being shielded by the IP. Because sometimes, most of the time, you are using an LLM that you have no idea how it's been trained. And by the way, many of you probably will work in an international capacity, so your companies are international. You probably know that this week EU just started, they found the consensus on the EU Act. However, security, copyright, and cost, those are the three elements that you should factor in from the beginning of your projects. Is a question, or do we want to take now, or?
Let's
Sure.
do it. Let's live dangerously.
So when you're talking about like copyright and stuff, you're talking about like pixel images of the functional space.
Not necessarily, also code. So the
The
way
code itself, when it gets to an AI model, is different than code that's being interpreted on the ML. So most code on a model is done machine-based, binary that goes back and forth. Therefore, there's no copyright pre-existing. It's actually you're interpreting all the way back. Best case, you have an API that can go back and you say, I'm duplicating an API. But because you're using functional space, which is how data poisoning happens, when you're tricking the data poisoning as it goes back and forth from a dog to otherwise, it's the reason why it can work as a whole. So it's not the model that is copyrightable. It's not the code that's copyrightable. If anything, it'd be the process in which the machine code is executing all the way through, which is delivering the result, not the actual code itself.
I would like to disagree on this.
Your view of a painting, not the actual painting.
The way that this thing works so let's do the application in the modern enterprise. Typically, what you do, you take code, and typically in a RAG approach, without doing fine tuning, you put your base of code in a vector database, and that's what your code base you build as a sample.
That's not quite correct. So the machine code itself needs to operate in a way which you can process. That's why you can download a whole entire model for like 30, 40 gigabytes.
I think you might be talking about two different things: the application code and the underlying model.
Yeah, so we were talking about ownership of the outputs.
Yeah,
Right.
the outputs. Yeah.
But the outputs itself are often an interpretation of your UI, of like how you view it versus of how it's actually executed. So like a machine, when it's being prosecuted and executed, it's just saying like this is the most probable like response, and then it's matching. That's how it does translation, right? You all know that. So you're not owning the machine code. At best case, you're owning the response. You're saying because I translated this language in this way, maybe I own that more than someone else.
So
That's
that's
like
there is a
translation
fundamental.
of English
I would
to
love to
Spanish.
double click in person, but so the way that it works in LLM, right? It's a probabilistic model. So you take a large examples and then you will derive the probability of what you want to be. So much of the code, for your surprise, is actually taken from licensed MIT code. And I would like to double click. Let's have this conversation, but that's how it happens. It's very important that you consider this when you generate your code using an LLM. That's what you're doing. You're using chunk of code that has been written before and then put it together in a probabilistic manner.
So that chunk is an interpretation, it's not the actual code. That's the difference, it's like the actual code.
Well, so
It
it's
is.
in some ways it's sort of predictive autocomplete. And so there is a risk that maybe it's not the exact same code, but it's close enough that someone would look at that and say, well, that's a derivative work of our open source license code, right? Because if I started typing, let's say I went into ChatGPT and I said, complete this sentence, and I started typing, it was the best of times, it was the worst of, I'm probably going to get times, right? And so, a lot of the models work in the same way, where it's been trained on all of this data and it's predicting sort of the most likely response, and that most likely response may match up to some of the original content.
With a good authoring tool that you can use also, you should quote when MIT code has been used, including the vulnerability. Because another thing that you are importing with this thing, when you build your code, you are also importing known vulnerability of classes that have been inherited. So just to mention, make sure that when you start to experiment, your tool, your model that you use needs to give you this sort of solid understanding of these components. So for the security is the other thing that absolutely I recommend to be paranoid. We had a conversation on the back. Look, you are probably giving not just the code, but the secret source of your company's financial data, manual, policy, everything that in general you want to keep in the boundaries of a company to an LLM. So the first thing to ask is, who is going to use this data? And if you do not have a clear answer, do not make business with that particular LLM. I'm as brutal as that. Sorry, took probably too much time.
No, that's fine. So,
I was just going to add on the private. So I'm not a lawyer. I think the lawyers are going to be really busy this year with all these issues and things. So it'll be very interesting. But on the privacy side, the way I look at it, if it's in the model, it's going to be exposed. So just assume anything in the model, anything you put in your RAG documents, right, and things is going to be exposed. I don't care. Yeah, you can put a system prompt in there to try to prevent those, but jailbreaking these things is incredibly easy, and people spend all day trying to do it. So that data will be exposed. And then if you're using it, like if you're using ChatGPT, right, unless you check that box, it's going to, on what you input, it's going to train on that data and things. I mean, my company banned ChatGPT because there was an early incident around that, and to this day it is banned, at work. So just realize that whatever's in the model and whatever you submit to the model and whatever the response is back is going to be available to anyone who can use that model. Now, which might be a great argument for, instead of using OpenAI, to go to somebody like Amazon, AWS, and go, you know what, I want to use, I'm your ad. I want to use 70 billion parameter Llama 2, and I'm going to build my own thing, and then I can keep it private, at least within my company.
And I was just going to say, building on that point, one of the ways we've been telling clients to think about it is anything that you put into one of those generative AI tools, think of as a disclosure of confidential information. And so some tools will tell you expressly, anything that you put in, we will use to further train the model. That's going to be the riskiest, right? Because as was just described, someone else could say, well, what happened at so-and-so's last board meeting? And maybe they now get the answer because that's been something that one of your employees put, into a training, put into the model and basically put in as new training data. There are a number of companies that say, no, if you select the right toggles or we have security procedures where it won't be used for further training. And that certainly provides more comfort, but they still have the data, right? Unless you've brought the tool completely in-house. It's still sitting somewhere. And so when you think about generally in your business, the risk of disclosing confidential information to potential partners, right, the more people you disclose it to, the more places that confidential information is living. And so even if someone is committing that they're not going to use it to further train the model, it's still out there, right? It's still sitting on their servers. So it's not 100% risk-free. And so that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about, you know, the disclosures or the information that you and your employees might be using for prompts.
Austin, anything to add on the security side? That was good. Actually, Andrea had a good segue mixed in there. Was we were talking about one of the three things you mentioned to keep track of was the cost. So, you know, what are the cost factors involved with evaluating Gen AI, and then what kind of financial resources are enterprises putting behind this?
So you show your demo,
Yeah.
the evaluation in terms of response time. One of the factors to consider is the cost. And not the LLM, all LLM are equal in cost and performance. So I know there is this sport of analyzing the number of billion of parameters that the model is. Now we are going to see soon multi-trillion billion parameters. The first question is, does it make sense to invest doubling the cost, or even sometimes completely different magnitude, for use cases that doesn't justify the cost? You showed, for example, the difference between Claude and I think Jurassic. When you compare the cost of those with ChatGPT and other models, the difference is astonishing. You could bankrupt a company, and I'm serious, I know who is experimenting here, in finding a bill that you jump on the chair. So the cost, on top of security, is what we learned for years in IT, is to be paramount. Choose the right model depending on the application. If you have a sophisticated inference that you're asking, yes, put on the table which are the potential, but don't jump immediately to the conclusion that the best, the smartest, is always the best tool. That's my experience.
And from your demo, I actually thought where you were showing, for example, all the different cat questions was really helpful because there are some providers who will charge every single time you put in a different prompt, right? And so when someone, you know, either if you're using the tool internally, and especially if you're integrating it in something that's going out to customers, if someone goes in and says, tell me a cat joke, tell me a funny cat joke, tell me a funny joke about cats, tell me an amusing cat joke, right? All of those are going to be potentially, depending on the tool, an additional charge. And so that can run up the bill really, really quickly.
That's why I'm launching Cat GPT with hundreds of cat jokes.
Can I just add, I mean, I just want to echo about, choose the model that's just enough for what you want, right? I mean, opening up, amazing, but expensive, right? And there's a lot of latency. And there's some of these small models, like I'm a big fan of like a French company Mistral's doing with the 7 billion parameter model. It's amazing what that will do. And running that is a lot faster and a lot cheaper there. So I think people go and they go, you know, are you building a general purpose chatbot? Yeah, okay, then maybe you need this giant, enormous model. Are you building something purpose-built for specific uses? Then something much smaller that'll be more economical and faster and cheaper. Faster, economical, cheaper, same thing. I repeat myself. Is going to be the right choice. So, you know, the race to more parameters is better is definitely over for a lot of technology reasons, which we probably won't get into. But it's also something where you don't use a sledgehammer to hit a tack in. And I think a lot of people are tending to do that right now because I'll use OpenAI. Well, it can be very expensive.
There was also, I don't know if there was a question still back over there.
Oh yeah, I had a question. So Google Cloud says in their agreements that if you use their Vertex AI, Bard, whatever, and they don't keep the prompt or the response, and it felt like you were saying that they do keep the prompt and the response. Were you just making a general statement, specific? Because I mean, you know, when my customer asked, I read the disclosure at Google, and Google told me that they're not keeping the prompt or the response. Do you know otherwise?
Yeah, so it seems like maybe you've got a response as well, but I was gonna say, it just, you have to look at every tool individually, right? So some of them, so for example, when I'm using, sort of like free chat GPT for my personal use, I can go back and I can see all of the queries that I've ever asked before, right? And so, and also that one probably they are keeping those prompts, and using it to further train, but depending on the company, some of them may be storing the prompts in response, some of them may be immediately deleting all of it, some may be using it to further train the model, some may not be. And so you just have to look at the tools and their terms and the commitments that they're making.
We put in written in AWS. What you asked for is the commitment that we have in written when you enroll to Bedrock, no matter if it's a first or third party. So we put in written that no data will be used for training, no data will be ever seen by a human to reinforce the data.
And that just seems to be why you go with the big cloud providers, because they know that the last reason an enterprise would use models they don't know. They don't trust the little guys, so they go with the Goose and maybe AW. Yeah. Because they're explicit. They don't retain.
So just want to get back on the cost side of things. You're talking about the financial costs around evaluating the models, and this is the two things I was going to ask. What are the costs on the resource side? Are we seeing changes in the org structure around teams working on Gen AI? Are there different roles that are needed? And if you're seeing that internally at all?
Well, I mean, there's been a shortage of machine learning engineers for 10, 15 years, right? And it's only worse now. It's much worse. And so, I mean, it's a real problem, like hiring people with the right knowledge, right? I mean, I think people are, engineers are not into machine learning. A lot of them are getting into it, but you're really getting that expertise is really tough, and it's super competitive. And we've all heard of these crazy salaries, and that's frankly because of the marketplace dynamics, right? If you're a machine learning engineer, right, you are going to do very well right now, and kudos to you, because there were some more lean times when AI was not such a hot topic, right? So they deserve everything they're getting, but it's a hard problem.
Even there are $500,000 offers out there for prompt engineers. Sounds crazy. Prompt engineering. That's what is the kind of jobs offer that we saw in the market. To give you an example, it makes a difference, prompt engineering. If it's worth $500,000, I'm not sure. But
Even you see on the conversational AI side, folks are questioning the role of the designers, and now whether it's more prompt engineering. Do you still need to design? That's one of the questions of debate too. Actually, I don't know, Roger, what do you think about that? Since you're more like
well, I've always been a fan of the design side of the house, and think that's super important. And that you need your designers who think different than the engineers side of the house, right? And a collaboration is really important. So saying that a prompt engineer is going to replace designers seems kind of foolhardy to me, because we've seen, and Arte, you and I worked back in the voice era, right? Everybody was like, yeah, we're going to have our developers do all our work, right? And they do all this development and coding, and then they build the natural language model, right? And they just don't think that way. And so it was this incredibly beautiful, sexy piece of code with a shit front end, right? And I'm afraid if you take the designers out of the equation, we're going to see some more beautiful, sexy code with more shit front ends.
One of the interesting things that we've also been talking about, even within a law firm, is that some of the work that it might eliminate is sort of the most junior work, right? But you need those junior people to develop into sort of mid-level people and senior people, right? And so you can't just say, well, we're not going to ever hire another, junior associate or junior engineer because we can have their work done by a machine, because you need to train up those people so that they get the skill sets to then become, for example, a senior engineer or a senior attorney. And so it's not necessarily the scenario where you can say, oh, well, all of this work can just be done by the machines, and so we don't need to hire people into those positions anymore.
That's definitely a fair point. One of the things we were talking about, the data and security of prompts going in, what content you're potentially submitting to the models, but and we touched upon this a little bit, but what about the responses coming out, like the potential for hallucinations, information being incorrect, maybe it's off-brand. How are enterprises addressing this or mitigating this? You want to start, Roger?
Oh yeah. So the hallucination problem gets real when you try to start to build something. It's all cute and fun when you're using ChatGPT or that, or I was using Gemini the other day and I was hallucinating like crazy, and I was being entertained, but I'm like, this is a real problem. If you start building things and all of a sudden it hallucinates, which is not a problem that we're used to seeing, is this it not only hallucinates, the other problem is it's stochastic, right? And it just makes people's heads spin. Same input, different output, right? So you look at on the QA or engineering side, and people are like, "Whoa! Like, how do I test this thing? How do I know if it has different output from the same input?" And I think that's both. There's a tooling question there, and there's also a bit of a mindset change where you're going to accept it's a stochastic system and it's going to output different data. The hallucinations, honestly, there's a lot of people do things like have the not a fan of this, but it works pretty well, is to go ask the model a question, gets the answer, and then feed the question and answer back to the same model and have it self-evaluate, right? That actually works pretty well. There's some prompt engineering things you can do to help it. A lot of this prompt engineering stuff is emergent. The other day I was reading an article about Claude. If you tell it with RAG, if you tell it what is it? If start your response with the most important part of this, or the most important sentence I found was, and all of a sudden the accuracy goes up to 98 or 99%.
Yes, assistant.
Yeah, and so we get this emergent, but all these feel to me like a little bit of Band-Aids over a problem that we haven't fully solved. And is frankly, we were just talking, first question was, everybody's doing these crazy things, cool things behind the firewall, but putting these things in front of the public is where that hallucination really, really is a big problem, and we're going to have to solve it.
It is, but absolutely, completely agree. It's part of the technology that we don't understand before. It's the reality. There are mechanisms to limit. So fundamentally, the hallucination happens when an LLM doesn't have all the answer that is required and tries to make up. To your point, an example that many of you can try, there are two examples that I would like tomorrow for you to try. One, try to, when you ask with a prompt to an LLM, try to explain step-by-step the reasoning and look at the difference. Another thing that seems crazy, but if you give a role to an LLM, so I always give an example. I have an equation. If you're curious, I can give you. And I ask several LLMs, solve for me this equation. 90% of the time, that equation is wrong. If you tell them that they are mathematicians, they solve correctly.
I was going to add, you want to make an LLM?
Why is that?
Why is that?
Yes, I'm going to ask a question. Yes.
Why is that?
Yes.
That's exactly the point. I don't know.
Why is
That's
that?
a very good.
No, you're supposed to know the answer.
I wish I would be definitely much richer than knowing this, but
Part of the problem is LLMs, unless you explicitly tell them, never say, I don't know, right? And you actually should put in system instruction, if you don't know, don't, and that actually helps a lot because they'll make up an answer, but that's not the only problem. I was going to say, another way to make an LLM hallucinate, start asking it geography questions about southernmost and northernmost cities, and especially if one of my favorite questions is, every LLM I've ever tried, it's what are the 4 major fashion week cities is southernmost? And every LLM says it's Milan and it's New York. And I don't know why. And then if you get the 4 cities directly, it'll say, oh yeah, London, Paris, New York, and Milan, and order them. And you do a chain of thought prompt, and it'll show you the longitude. And it just gets them wrong. They're really bad at geography for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe there's a machine learning engineer who can explain that.
I am from Milan.
No, but there you go.
So,
They also, a lot of the hallucination also comes from the fact is that they always want to answer the question, even if the question can't be answered. And so, for example, there have been some publicized cases of lawyers getting in trouble by asking LLMs for case law and then getting back cases that don't exist. And the LLM, again, as I said, it's sort of predictive autocomplete in a way. And so if you say, give me a case that stands for this proposition, they will just make one up if one doesn't exist. Or if you say, give me 10 cases that stand for this proposition and only 2 exist, they'll give you the 2 real ones and 8 fake ones. And so, right now, the best we've been able to tell our clients how to combat this, and I'm open to any other ideas anyone else has, is to double check it. I mean, basically, when you get the results from the LLM, if this is something that you are going to publish externally, use another resource to double check that data, even if the tool itself was sort of the quick way to get an initial answer.
I always call an LLM, it's like an incredibly intelligent buddy who drinks too much and likes to tell fish tales.
But there are technologies, just to complete, there is no way that we can eliminate the hallucination. I completely agree. But prompting engineering, also without starting a religious war, also the fine-tuning, so giving more data that is possible without fine-tuning most of the time, this alleviates the issue of hallucination. Probably because it doesn't have to make it up, the data.
I have 2 more questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. Sorry. Let's talk a little bit about the future of the space. So since everything's moving so quickly, even a large enterprise is rolling out more stuff, more LLMs are coming out. What are some of the advancements you think are coming next, or what you'd like to see happen next? And maybe I can start with Austin.
What I'd like to see or what I think is interesting?
Either one. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go with what I think is interesting. So I'm going a little bit of a riff here. Because I think sometimes it's fun to think about the founders and the startups that are coming up. So, 7 years ago, there was a company out of Y Combinator, of which Chris Messina, if you all know him, you know the hashtag. He had a startup called Molly that he had at YC, and they raised some funding, but they shut down a couple years later. And the idea was it would mine your personal data and create an avatar of yourself that you could then have sit on your website, and people could query that chatbot and learn about you. That idea was so absolutely totally insane in 2017 that I had to sit down for an hour and talk to him. And it opened up my mind to a world that today feels very, very real. I invest in enterprise security, the boring stuff, but if I was a more generalist investor, I would absolutely be investing in artificial social networks. I think we have an epidemic of loneliness today. And I think that the lack of human communication and connection that we have can scarily be supplemented by your drunk buddy who likes to tell fishing stories. And so there's things about me that could be easily surfaced through whatever the personal information that I have that's very easy to mine today. Right? I like brutalist architecture. I like really crappy European techno music. I once went indoor ice climbing in Korea, like strange things, right, that only my friends would know are now accessible to an agent. And I think that it's too big of an opportunity for somebody to not solve, and I think we'll see it happen a lot faster than we would imagine.
When I was at AWS, one of the startups we were potential customer we were talking to, it was a dating app where the idea was you make avatars and have it was right over a Black Mirror episode, the 2 avatars talk to each other, and then you decide whether you want to go on the date or not. And they tried, to your point, when we first talked to them, that was really difficult to figure out how to do it. But now you could have it, scan your Gmail, figure out how the person talks and what they like.
Obviously
That's actually probably one of the least traumatic episodes of Black Mirror. One of the only ones that I recommend.
Yeah, I think it's funny, we know that these tools exist, and for everyone here in the room, right, you've all kind of begun to imagine what it's like to talk to this agent as a person. And when you start having these discussions, they'll think like a mathematician, all of a sudden start spitting out interesting answers, like, oh, if I actually think of this not as an index or a card catalog, which is essentially what Google is, basically you're searching for certain terms, but as a person, then it's very natural to me that we're going to have fake friends.
I also expect that we're going to see a lot more really fine-tuned and custom-built models for particular use cases. And we were talking earlier about, some of the hesitation to use a model. And I think a lot of that comes from some of the security risk, the hallucination risk, the risk that you're sort of not really getting the right response for your use case. But, for example, in the legal field, having an AI assistant that actually helps you with case law research and actually gives you real cases, or having a generative AI tool that will actually accurately help you with, diligence for, due diligence for a transaction would be a very useful scenario. But right now, it doesn't work to just plug that into a general purpose model tool, because you're going to get the wrong results, right? And so you need a tool that is only trained on real cases and only gives you back real cases. And that's a legal example, but the same would apply for people who are using it for for marketing data, or for people who are using it for artistic renderings, or people who are using it for scientific research, right? You need those finer tuned models that are really going to give you the accurate results and not just a response that sounds human.
How about yourself, Andrea?
Yeah, so I have two things that I would like happening and will happen. One is very tactical, simple, but with a great reason and opportunity. You mentioned the chatbot, no? So I'm sure many of you interacted with chatbot on the web and sometimes also on the voice, but it's there for you guys. But the reality is those chatbot or voice bot suck. So we love when we are the people that build this thing, but as a user, desperately, if you're calling, if you're chatting, it's not to read information as available on the web. You're trying to solve something complex, and this thing gets in the way to get an answer. Now the technology is not purely taking a chatbot, connecting to an LLM and make it work. Now we have technologies like agents, things that can make things without if then else, but in a way unstructured and smart way. So I would like to see this year disappearing this dumb chatbot. That's my dream as a consumer. The second one is also seeing the LLM entering into the general augmented intelligence, providing to these capabilities sensorial, authentic sensorial capability, the capability of viewing, the capability of listening, the capability of responding in real time to external solicitation. That's where is my dream the technology is moving, and we'll see soon the advancement. That's my dream.
Yeah, so, well, first one I want to do about that little caveat is, this is my personal opinion. It definitely would benefit my employer, but is not something I know of. It's just something that I read about. I think you're going to read a lot about edge LLMs in the next year or so. It's just too obvious that it's really expensive to go to the cloud. It's costly. It's costly. There's some privacy concerns. There's latency concerns. And that's kind of not really right now. It's kind of sitting in the academic world of how you have a smaller LLM at the edge and a larger one in the data center and how they work together. But there is way too, and it's always financial, there's way too much money that's going to be saved by having an LLM embedded in your phone. So to help your voice assistant, or to help any app, right? Ben has an LLM API and can use it, or to make device control better, or your laptop, or your appliance there. That is definitely going to happen, and I think it's going to be a real breakthrough, because then you can get incredible speed, and you can really drive down the costs there. A more aspirational one, I have a daughter who's a senior in high school and one who's a freshman, just started college. I would love to see education embrace AI. They're fighting it right now, and it's such an opportunity. And these tools, and I've showed them how to use it and help it, not to write their papers, but to be like, here, write your paper and then stick it in and get some help. It'll tell you things, right? It's a really good like little writing tutor, or you're brainstorming, ask it and do these things. And I really, really would like to see the education system, which typically repels and worries about technology, to go embrace this, because I think it's such an unlock.
At the demo night we did last month, there were two guys that created one to help. It was basically a math tutor, and it would help the kids, walk them through step by step how to solve the math problems. And the neat thing was, you could actually say you're doing your math problem by hand on paper, you could take a photo of it and it would analyze that. It would say, oh, you're on the right track, or no, you did this right. So it was actually pretty impressive. You got it there from Oxford, they're too, both from the UK.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of discussion about how these models can basically really help create more of an even playing field for learning by giving people access to effectively a custom tutor who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford one. And I have to say, even years ago, I remember my niece would just, my sister-in-law discovered that you could ask Alexa how to spell things. And so my niece would use this all the time because her parents got very sick of spelling things for her. But Alexa will just spell for you all day long. So.
Along those lines, it's the, and that was one of the exciting things I thought about voice assistants. But once you go, you need to look at some information. Once I go hit Google, then I'm going to go and I'm going to get a notification pop up. 30 minutes later, I've answered my question and I've been futzing at the computer for 30 minutes. So having something that's direct, ask a direct question and get the answer back without having to have all that stuff that's designed to addict me and keep me away from what I'm trying to do is a real win.
Definitely. So how about now we can open it up to the audience? Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, so you guys were talking about smaller LLM models. So there is an expertise, like mixer of experts, the smaller LLMs. That field is getting quite a bit attention lately. And on the second side of it, Gemini from Google, because I was working with a friend who works at the Pixel team, so they have done that three different kinds. One is on the data center, one at the edge, one at the phone level. So there are evolution happening quite a bit on that area.
Yeah, like I said, edge LLMs are the most exciting announcement to me from Google was the small one.
Yeah.
I think that's actually going to be the most impactful.
Yes.
And I think nobody paid attention to it.
I know.
And for special built application, Llama, we discussed that it's
yeah.
Llama 7 billion parameters. It's actually one of the most popular used to use technology like LoRa to actually reduce the parameters for special purpose-built LLM. So I completely agree with that's part of what I was saying. Not necessarily you need trillions of parameters for an application that doesn't require general knowledge. I completely agree with you. It's super exciting.
The gentleman in the blue, yeah.
So I have two legal related questions. I've asked them both at once. So one was, we talked about the hallucinations and how there's example cases already of lawyers potentially using, incorrect information. Who's the liability in that case? Or is there any sort of agreement or understanding? Is the model provider liable for providing false information? Is the lawyer responsible because they ultimately are representing themselves as the
Cooley's office, the lawyer is definitely not responsible.
and this sort of asks my question with the copyright ownership for the output. My understanding was that was a preliminary ruling. Is there any evolution of that? Is there an ongoing litigation that might change the output or ownership of the output of these things? So sorry, two questions, but.
Yeah, so first of all, actually in those cases, the lawyers were generally sanctioned because they are supposed to, they're effectively representing that the data that they're providing is accurate and they're standing behind it. There is a case right now where someone's actually suing OpenAI for providing false information about them.
Defamation style.
Yeah, the defamation case. But we'll have to see how that case plays out, right? Because generally speaking, the LLMs are quite clear that there's hallucination risk. They're not standing behind the data as being 100% accurate. And so again, I don't know for sure how that's going to play out, but generally speaking, I think the understanding is that you have to take those outputs with a grain of salt. In terms of the copyright ownership question, so it is, I think there was actually recently, sort of a statement, sort of a call for response from the Copyright Office saying, we're getting more data to further assess this position. They do have some currently sort of very vague commentary of, well, there could be sufficient human intervention for certain components of it to become human-owned, but we really just don't, especially in the US, we don't have a lot of guidance on that point. There are other countries that actually are finding copyright ownership of AI generated work, where they found that and they were generally finding it to be owned by the person who engineered the prompt, because they found that there was sufficient creativity in that prompt and sort of further iterating of that prompt, that person had a sort of a sufficient creative element to claim copyright ownership over the output. That said, again, in the US, the case law and the statement of the Copyright Office has found that even where there was an incredible amount of engineering of a prompt, the person who did that still didn't own the outputs. So it's still TBD in the US and also evolving in other countries. Like I said, there are other countries that are looking more favorably on copyright ownership of the outputs.
Yeah.
Are you seeing, this is kind of a legal question too, are you seeing that enterprises are taking more of a, like bring the tool into a walled garden thing that's data compliant? Or are they kind of waiting and seeing and turning a blind eye to unsanctioned use?
You know, it depends a lot on the company. Most of them aren't necessarily trying to turn a blind eye to unsanctioned use. You know, we've helped a number of companies this year with, for example, generative AI policies that are supposed to set some guidelines and guardrails within the company in how people use these tools. You know, it's not practical for every company to bring a tool in-house and to have a walled garden approach. And, you know, as was discussed earlier, in terms of the timeline sometimes to negotiate these enterprise agreements, you know, earlier on we were seeing some of the larger companies say, oh sure, mark up our terms, and we were marking up the terms and we would hear nothing for 3 months, and then we would get a markup back, right? And a lot of companies just can't operate on that kind of timeline. And so, you know, there's some element of the walled garden, bringing the tool in-house approach, if you have time to negotiate an enterprise agreement, or if you have the engineering capability in-house to actually run it. You know, some companies, the ways that they're putting up guardrails are just saying, well, you can do this and you can't do that. And so, you know, maybe we're not using the tool internally, but you just can't put certain prompts into the tool, and that's how we're protecting ourselves.
Any other questions? Oh.
So I've got one. So I've used ChatGPT for roughly 120, 140 hours working on the code base. It hasn't hallucinated one time that I can recall. So I'm just wondering, is my story unique, or is it because I'm working with data that's only what I'm feeding it and I'm not asking for external data? Because it's been incredibly accurate.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have a lot of experience with that. That's pretty impressive. It hasn't. I haven't seen it hallucinate. I've seen it do substandard code, or kind of old school, right? I was just using it the other day, and it was Node.js, and you know, the Node.js community keeps on liking to put syntactic sugar to make things easier and easier, right? Which to me gets more and more like, how do you keep up? So like, what was interesting is ChatGPT did it old school, Gemini did it new school. And then I had this idea, and I fed the code back and forth between the two of them. And actually it was really good. The end result was much better than what the first two. And I was like, oh, that's a kind of a clever thing. Maybe I ought to code something up here that goes among the various LLMs and like feeds the code back and forth and have them spit out the eventual result. I mean, there's a paper where somebody did that with image generation, and did that. And I was like, I kind of like the idea with code, but yeah, they tend to be pretty good with code. I mean, it doesn't mean it will be bug free. It doesn't mean that it won't have, you know, to your point about, you know, it may have a security risk or something there. But yeah, they're incredible tools for coding there. But yeah, try feeding it between the two different LLMs and see what happens.
Oh, one last one. Yeah, all right, sure.
I have a non-technical business background, and I'm looking to pivot into a career in AI in the next 6 months. What kind of like career tracks or job titles or trainings do you think I should look into? Some of the ones that I've kind of explored recently, they're like too early, and there aren't actually those jobs yet, but there will be at some point. So I'm just curious to hear what you think is the most likely kind of early career track for a non-technical person.
I'll go. So because I'll use my wife as an example. My wife is an HR professional, and so I'm like, you got to look at AI and HR. So I don't know what your background is.
Like business operations?
Yeah, well, so look, where could you apply AI to that? Because I think this applied AI, this is really going to be hot because people, they're like, we got these incredible tools. They seem there's all these amazing things that we can probably do with them, but what are we going to do with them? So my thought would be apply whatever you were doing before in the skills and knowledge, and then go look at what AI could do for it. I've been working a lot with my wife just personally on like, okay, what would AI in HR be? And actually, it's pretty interesting and exciting. So I'm sure you could probably find some things there. I'd say that for anyone. Like, if you're not in AI, how would AI improve what you already know?
So the analyst, I think, an analyst Gartner, what they see in the future, they publish something in October, you can Google it. So the bulk, 75% of the impact overall in the enterprise will be around customer service or customer relationship, engineering and DevOps, marketing and sales. This is where 75% of the impact is already across the industries as an horizontal. You need to figure out your own secret sauce or learning, but if you want a guideline, 75% is a lot. So,
Yeah, that was from that, who was the big consult management group? McKinsey. I think it's a McKinsey paper that, it's actually pretty good. I think they're a little bearish in some of the other industries, and that there could be more uplift, but I think that data came from McKinsey. So search for McKinsey AI, and they're doing some really pretty good stuff. I mean, it's all management consulting style, so that may or may not be good, but I thought that was a really good paper.
I went to management consulting and sensitive too.
Yeah, I don't know, nothing against management consulting. There's a certain way they present things.
I mean, similarly, and to the point that was made earlier about prompt engineering, I think we're going to increasingly see roles for people who really know how to use the tools and know how to implement the tools efficiently and in a cost-effective way. And so, there could also, I mean, the same way that, for example, a lot of companies that use Salesforce need to employ someone who effectively manages their Salesforce database, right? I could also see roles like that evolving for generative AI tools.
One of the biggest breakout successes of the past couple of years, I would make an argument that it was the first company success on the application layer that blew up, that kind of started the funding craze, was Jasper AI, which was making ad copy. So they went, I mean, that's pretty much public information. They went from 0 to 50 in a year, which is insane. They came out of YC as a CRM tool. So no one there had any ML experience whatsoever. They ran into some sort of, I don't know, dead end. I don't know the full story, but they ran into some dead end on what they were trying to do initially, and then started playing around with ChatGPT 2. Whatever, that's now become commodified, and they have their own competitive headwinds. But it's really interesting to me that, like, one of the absolute breakout successes was not a team of PhDs from Stanford. It was actually people literally just doing exactly what you guys are saying, which is just playing around with what they, was a problem that they had. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I appreciate all you attending, and definitely the panelists. This is super exciting and interesting to hear everyone's thoughts. I appreciate all you guys. So can we give them all a round of applause? We try to do these events every month, so we do demo nights too. So if folks have startups or working on stuff that they like the demo, ping me. We can see what having you do that. But thanks again, everyone, for being part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.